Welcome, restless soul. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the dark places where sleep and fear blur together. Before we begin, take a breath, settle in. Let the quiet hum of the world fade away. If you're listening late, alone, you're exactly where you should be. I still remember the exact moment I realized something was wrong with my body. It wasn't pain at first. It was the sound. A soft, wet clicking somewhere inside my chest, syncing perfectly with the rhythm of my heartbeat. I noticed it while driving, my tires whispering over the highway in that endless, hypnotic way that only happens after hours without stopping. I was 22, exhausted, hollowed out by school, debt, and a recent breakup that left me feeling peeled open. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a dark vein cutting through the countryside, and I was determined not to stop. 2 nights earlier, my girlfriend had ended things with a calmness that felt surgical. No anger, no tears, just finality. That quiet tone lingered in my head like an infection. So instead of resting halfway home, I filled my car with caffeine and pointed it north, chasing exhaustion hard enough that it couldn't catch me first. By midnight, the world emptied. By 1:30, even the radio abandoned me, dissolving into static. I rolled my window down to stay awake. The air smelled wrong to thick, like damp soil left too long in the dark. My chest clicked again. I pressed a hand against my sternum, laughing it off, blaming stress. Somewhere far off, lightning flashed without sound, illuminating clouds shaped like bruises. At 3:04 a.m., my gas light flicked on. I stared at it, irritation mixing with dread. The GPS showed nothing nearby. Just forest, just time. Then an exit sign appeared like a mistake someone forgot to erase. Exit 218, Wellmouth. The ramp curved away from the highway sharply, trees closing in so tightly my headlights seemed to sink into them. The clicking in my chest grew louder, wetter. Each breath felt shallow, like my lungs were pressing against something that didn't belong there. The road narrowed, paint lines cracked and faded. No mailboxes. No signs of life. I nearly turned back until I saw lights ahead. Dim, yellow, flickering like tired eyes. Relief loosened my grip on the wheel. The town emerged suddenly. Brick buildings hunched together like old men sharing a secret. Signs hung crooked. Grocery, pharmacy, diner. All dark. All watching. My speed dropped without me meaning to. 20 miles per hour felt enforced, as if the town itself demanded it. As I drove deeper, the buildings gave way to houses. Every porch sagged forward, every window black. My chest began to itch from the inside. I scratched at my shirt, then froze. Something shifted beneath my skin, like fingers stretching. I checked the fuel gauge. Too low. I pulled into the nearest driveway to turn around. Gravel crunched, loud in the silence. A porch light snapped on. The front door opened. An older man stepped out. Tall and thin. His skin pulled tight over his bones like it didn't quite fit. His eyes weren't focused on my face, they were fixed on my chest. I rolled my window down halfway, palms raised. "Sorry," I said. My voice sounded wrong, too echoey in my own ears. The man tilted his head, listening not to my words, but to the clicking. I felt it then, unmistakably. Something knocking from the inside, testing the walls of me. I backed out too fast. In the mirror, the man hadn't moved, but others had appeared. Figures at the edges of driveways, bodies turned toward the sound I carried. Toward me. When I reached the main street again, they were everywhere. Dozens of them, men, women, children, all silent, all staring. The clicking inside my chest became a chorus, answering something unseen. One person stepped forward, hand raised not in greeting, but in recognition. I pressed the gas. As I sped away, pain finally bloomed, sharp and wet. as something inside me laughed and stretched. By the time I hit the edge of town, my breathing wasn't mine anymore. Each inhale felt borrowed, forced through lungs that now burned and pulsed like living things. The clicking had turned into a scraping, as if bone were dragging against bone from the inside. I didn't slow down until the highway lights reappeared, fluorescent and holy. Even then, I could feel Wellmouth clinging to me, like residue under my skin. 10 miles later, I coasted into a gas station running on fumes and adrenaline. The lights were too bright, stabbing my eyes. I sat in the car, hands locked down the wheel, waiting for the pain to stop. It didn't. It spread. A pressure built behind my ribs, swelling with each heartbeat. When I finally stepped out, my knees buckled. Something moved beneath my shirt, tracing slow circles. Inside, the cashier looked up. His face went pale. "You okay, man?" he asked, eyes flicking to my chest. I nodded too fast. He didn't press. I think he'd seen that look before. In the bathroom, I lifted my shirt. Veins I didn't recognize webbed across my torso, dark and raised. Beneath them, shapes shifted, wrong shapes, pressing outward. As if my organs had rearranged themselves to make room. I gagged, gripping the sink. When I coughed, something clicked against my teeth from inside my throat, then slid back down. I filled the tank and drove home without stopping. The sun was rising when I pulled into my parents' driveway. The light didn't help. If anything, it made the changes easier to see. Over the next few days, the symptoms worsened. My heartbeat echoed too loudly. My skin tightened. At night, I could feel fingers probing my ribs from the inside, learning the shape of me. Doctors found nothing. Scans showed organs that were technically human, arranged just slightly wrong. They told me stress does strange things. I stopped arguing when my reflection began blinking a half second after I did. Weeks passed, the clicking became rhythmic, almost comforting. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear whispers layered beneath it, many voices speaking as one. They talked about roads, about travelers, about hunger. I started dreaming of Wellmouth, of standing perfectly still as others passed through me, listening. I tried to find the town again. Online maps glitched when I searched for it. Old records showed nothing. But my body remembered. My chest would ache whenever I drove at night, especially when the road emptied and the radio failed. One evening, months later, I woke up standing in my kitchen, barefoot, keys in my hand. My reflection in the dark window smiled when I didn't. Beneath my skin, something shifted eagerly, rearranging itself for the drive. I don't stop in small towns anymore. I don't drive at night unless I have to, but sometimes, when exhaustion hits just right, I feel the road calling through my bones. And I know that if I ever hear that clicking again on the highway, Wellmouth won't need to appear on any map. It will already be inside me, waiting for the next visitor. I still remember the exact smell of the house the first night it bled into me. Fresh paint, yes, and dust left too long, but underneath that, something coppery and wet, like a bandage pulled off too soon. It was the kind of smell that didn't belong in a place advertised as move-in ready, but I told myself stress can invent details when it's bored. I was 29, newly finished with grad school, hollowed out by deadlines and debt and the quiet panic of realizing adulthood had no clear instructions. I stood on the porch of a one-story house in Maple Hollow, a working-class suburb most people only passed on the way somewhere else. Beige siding, low roof, narrow driveway. The kind of place that tries very hard not to be noticed. My parents hugged me goodbye like they were sending me off to sea. Proud smiles stretched thin with worry. My hands shook on the key, not from excitement, but from the pressure of pretending this was what success looked like. They helped with the down payment because the economy eats people alive and calls it character building. Inside, the house felt temporary, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. A kitchen with cabinets so high they seemed to leer down at me. The living room echoed until I bought a rug. It was the size of a trailer without the stigma. I told myself independence didn't need to be pretty to be real. The first weeks were heavy. Silence pressed against my ears at night until it felt like something physical, something leaning close. Every creak sounded intentional. I slept with the TV murmuring low, afraid my thoughts might rot if left alone too long. I worked late downtown, desperate to prove I deserved my job, and came home numb. Microwave dinners, collapsing onto the couch still in my work clothes. Slowly, the house softened. Thrift store art, plants I forgot to water. Friday nights with co-workers, cheap wine. Laughter bouncing off walls that had learned how to listen. And then, I started dating again. Apps. Coffee. Conversations that died quietly. I told myself I wasn't in a rush, but some nights I wished someone else's shoes were by the door. I wished the silence would stop asking me questions. The first wrong thing happened on a Tuesday. Reset day. Comfort food. Video games. I'd ordered a large pepperoni the night before, eaten 1 slice, and put the box in the fridge. The next evening, half of it was gone. I laughed, out loud. Told the empty kitchen I needed to get it together. Stress eating. That was me. Except it kept happening. Milk disappearing. Leftovers gone. I started waking up with my jaw sore, my tongue tender, like I'd been chewing all night. I found a smear of dried blood on my pillowcase one morning. Thin. Rust-colored. I pressed my tongue against my teeth and felt a raw notch I didn't remember earning. I told myself it was a canker sore. Anxiety does strange things to flesh. The joke stopped being funny when I came home and found the fridge door open, not wide, just enough to breathe. I stood there, keys in my hand, listening. The house was too quiet, like it was holding something in its mouth. That night, I locked my bedroom door. I dreamed of chewing, of swallowing something that wriggled and tried to crawl back up. I remembered the hidden cameras almost accidentally. Old charger cams from high school paranoia, packed without knowing why. I plugged one in by the counter, another facing the fridge. My fingers shook as I did it. Peace of mind, I told myself. At work, Jenna mentioned a break-in at her mom's place. Food stolen. Cash missing. It's creepy, she said. Like someone was just there. My stomach twisted. When I told her about my food, about the cameras, she didn't laugh. That night, I watched the footage. The kitchen light clicked on. The cabinet above the sink creaked open from the inside. Something pale unfolded itself out, joints bending the wrong way at first, bones popping softly like knuckles. It wore my face. Or something close enough. Its skin sagged, stretched thin over a jaw that worked constantly, chewing even when there was nothing there. It went to the fridge, drank my milk, tore into leftovers with teeth too many and too small. It peeled back its lips and smiled at the camera, mouth red, gum shredded. Then it folded itself back into the cabinet, limbs compressing, bones sliding wetly into place, and closed the door from the inside. I didn't scream. I went numb. I called the police from my car, tasting blood where my tongue had split. When they pulled it out, it screamed that it was me. That it lived there first. I discovered the second mouth while brushing my teeth. It was small, puckered, hidden just beneath my left collarbone, opening and closing in a slow, hungry rhythm like it was practicing. I stared at it in the mirror until my vision fuzzed. Until denial collapsed under the weight of teeth. The police said there was no one in the house when they searched it. No woman. No creature. Just disturbed dust inside the cabinet and deep scratches in the wood, like something had tried to burrow deeper and failed. They asked if I'd been under stress. I laughed too hard. My mom stayed with me after that. She didn't see the mouth. Or maybe she pretended not to. I installed more cameras. Changed the locks. Adopted a mutt named Buck despite my allergies. Buck growled at the cabinets. At me, sometimes, when I wasn't looking. The hunger didn't stop. It got worse. I'd eat dinner and feel starving an hour later. The mouth beneath my skin would pull, stretch, whispering wet clicks I felt more than heard. My jaw ached constantly. My gums bled. I stopped eating. Trust felt dangerous. Touch felt like an invitation. At night, I listened to the house breathe, and sometimes I couldn't tell if the sound was coming from the walls or my own chest. I checked the footage obsessively. Most nights, nothing. Then one morning, I saw myself leave my bedroom. My posture was wrong. Too loose. My head lolled like it was heavy. I opened the cabinet and crawled inside. I woke up with splinters under my nails and wood dust in my hair. The mouth under my collarbone was swollen, lips chapped and cracked. It had been fed. Doctors found nothing wrong. Blood tests normal. Scans inconclusive. One suggested sleepwalking. Another mentioned dissociation. None of them noticed the way my skin shifted when I swallowed, how something else moved beneath it, rearranging itself. Buck stopped sleeping in my room. He stared at me with wide, white eyes, hackles raised. When I tried to pet him, the mouth under my skin opened wider, stretching, drooling. Buck snapped at the air and fled. I tried to starve it, skipped meals, drank water, until I was sick. The mouth bit me from the inside, sharp and furious. I woke up with bruises blooming along my ribs. Fingerprints I couldn't explain. The cabinet started to smell again. Copper and rot. The house felt tighter, like it was shrinking around me. I could hear chewing in the walls. Slow. Content. One night, the footage showed the cabinet door opening by itself. No one came out. Instead, something inside pressed against the wood, stretching it outward, molding it around a shape that looked almost human. I realized then that the house wasn't hiding something. It was teaching me. Showing me how to fold, how to make space where there wasn't any. How to live inside the walls. The mouth under my collarbone spoke for the first time. Not in words, in need. In certainty. It told me the house was never empty. It told me independence was just another word for being eaten slowly. I haven't called my parents. I haven't gone to work. I spend hours in the kitchen, staring at the cabinets, practicing the angles. Buck watches from the doorway, whining softly. Sometimes late at night, I still tell myself I'm safe. But when the hunger hits, when my skin stretches and splits to make room, I understand the truth. The house doesn't want someone new. It wants someone who fits. I never expected to discover what waits awake after midnight. But the night found me anyway, bleeding into my life like oil into sand. Brookview, Nevada was the kind of town you only noticed when you were already lost. A gaslit smudge off the interstate where engines idled and desperation paid in cash. After dark, the sidewalks belonged to people like me. I learned early that night has rules, and breaking them gets you buried. My name is Lena Moore. I was 26 when the desert decided to keep me. I came from a place that smelled like snow and regret, fled a childhood where fists spoke louder than promises. By the time I reached Brookview, fear was my only possession that still worked properly. People think fear makes you weak. They're wrong. Fear sharpens you. It teaches you which headlights to avoid and which smiles are too careful. That night began like every other. Wind dragged sand across asphalt, whispering like teeth against glass. Trucks came and went, their drivers loud and predictable. Then, just after 1 in the morning, A sedan rolled toward me with the patience of something hunting. A black Lincoln, old, immaculate. Headlights dimmed to a sickly glow. I hadn't seen it before. I always remembered the cars. The window lowered halfway. Inside, a man sat unnaturally still. His voice was soft, practiced, drained of heat. "Are you working?" My stomach tightened. Instinct screamed. I ignored it. Hunger is louder than angels. I asked where he wanted to go. He smiled faintly and said he preferred privacy. That word has teeth. I climbed in anyway. The car smelled like nothing. No trash, no clutter, no signs of a human life. As we pulled away, the town receded too quickly, lights swallowed by desert. Silence pressed in until it felt physical. I asked his name. He hesitated, then said, "You can call me Aaron." The name sat wrong. Like borrowed clothing. We passed broken signs and abandoned stations, the road thinning into darkness. I told him my limit. He ignored me. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were empty in a way I can't explain. Not dead, not alive, just vacant. He said, "You'll be safe. I chose you." Ahead, under a flickering lamp that shouldn't have had power, stood a woman in a torn yellow dress. She wasn't waiting. She was arranged. Her limbs hung at angles that made my teeth ache. I asked who she was. Erin whispered, "My last passenger." The car slowed, cold flooded my chest. The woman's head twitched. Then her whole body lurched forward with a wet sound, like joints tearing free. I told him to turn around. He said calmly, "She's already with us." I spun toward the back seat. Empty. Then the glass beside me breathed. A face pressed from the inside, skin stretched thin, eyes sunken, mouth sewn shut with something dark and glistening. I screamed and clawed at the locked door. Erin murmured, "She needs a living body to rest." The road became dirt. A collapsed house rose ahead like a broken ribcage. The car stopped. I ran. Cold air burned my lungs. Behind me came the sound of something dragging itself together. Bones clicking, flesh reordering. The woman emerged from shadow, her body correcting itself with each step. Limbs snapping into place like a puzzle forced together wrong. I ran blind into the desert, every direction identical. She whispered my name, not the one I used, the one I buried years ago. I hid beneath a rusted tower, but metal groaned above me. She clung upside down, skin splitting at the joints. Eyes rolling white as she smiled without a mouth. Headlights saved me, briefly. A deputy, Tom Reyes, pulled me into his truck. I begged him not to look. He didn't listen. In the mirror, she unfolded herself, jaw tearing open, teeth blooming like broken glass. Tom smiled as his pupils flooded black. "She's beautiful," he said, just before the truck flipped. I woke tasting blood and dirt, pinned upside down by the seatbelt as something inside me shifted, as if my organs were reconsidering their loyalty. The desert sky spun slowly above. Stars smeared like fingerprints. Tom lay unconscious beside me, ribs rising shallowly. Then I heard footsteps, not dragging, walking. Aaron knelt beside me, movements gentle, reverent. "She's chosen," he said softly, "and choice requires balance." Behind him, the woman stood upright now, her body almost human, almost. Skin were upon itself together in slow, obscene ripples, bones sliding beneath like worms under cloth. Where her mouth had been sewn shut, the stitches dissolved, thread retreating into her flesh. She inhaled deeply, savoring the air through new lungs. Aaron explained it simply. A life for a life. She was bound to the road, to the night, unless someone took her place. Someone who could see her. Someone alive. He offered his hand. If I chose another, I would walk free. If not, she would crawl inside me and wear me until I rotted. I begged, I prayed to gods that had never answered before. Survival answered instead. I looked at Tom, innocent, bleeding, breathing, The woman leaned closer. Her breath was cold and damp, smelling of earth and iron. I whispered yes. She moved with impossible speed. Her limbs elongated, joints splitting, arms unfolding into too many elbows as she wrapped around Tom. His scream cut short as her ribcage opened, bones peeling back like doors. She pressed herself into him, flesh sinking into flesh, their outlines merging, his skin stretching thin before tearing. Then they were gone, swallowed by darkness. Aaron stood, satisfied. "You're free," he said, already fading, his shape thinning like smoke, for now. Morning found me walking back toward town, coated in blood that wasn't all mine. No Lincoln, no bodies. The sheriff called it an accident. Brookview kept breathing. But nights changed me. Sometimes my joints ache in patterns that aren't mine. Sometimes my reflection lags a second behind. I hear her whisper when it's late, reminding me that freedom is rented, not owned. One night, I'll feel her hands inside my skin, rearranging me. When that happens, I'll need someone else. Late night always collects its debt. I still remember the moment I realized the quiet around our cabin wasn't natural. It happened before the knocking, before the fear had a shape. I stepped outside just after sunset and noticed footprints near the front steps that didn't belong to either of us. They were deeper than mine, longer than my wife's, and spaced strangely, as if whoever made them had been standing still for a long time. Not pacing, waiting. I told myself they were old, that rain had distorted them, but the mud was still wet and the edges were sharp. That was the first time the silence felt like attention rather than absence. In 2015, before everything unraveled, I believed quiet was a reward for living correctly. I was 31, newly married, and trying harder than I ever had to be responsible. My wife and I met through a low-key dating app meant for people who didn't enjoy noise. Our bios both mentioned preferring quiet nights and long conversations. At the time, that felt meaningful, like we had independently reached the same conclusion about how life should sound. We dated for 3 years. We learned how to argue without cruelty and apologize without turning it into a competition. Eventually, we agreed we didn't want a house or a neighborhood or neighbors close enough to hear us exist. We wanted a cabin, somewhere far north where cell service disappeared and the air smelled like pine and water instead of traffic. We found it through a private listing, a small wooden cabin near a lake called Alder Hollow, surrounded by miles of wilderness most people never bothered to visit. No resort. No hoe. No shared docks. That isolation was the selling point, the promise we paid for. The drive took just over 4 hours. Highways narrowed into roads that felt optional. Radio stations dissolved into static. Gas stations vanished. The deeper we went, the quieter everything became. Even the trees seemed thicker, leaning inward like they were listening. My wife smiled and said this was exactly what she needed. I agreed, meaning it completely, even as my ears rang from the absence of sound. The cabin was smaller than the photos suggested but solid. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen, and a living room with a couch worn smooth by decades of use. The front door faced the lake. The back pressed into forest so dense it swallowed light by mid-afternoon. It smelled like old wood, dust, and something faintly metallic that lingered in the air and clung to the back of my throat. That first night, rain tapped gently on the roof. My shoulders finally loosened. Around midnight, we turned off the lights and crawled into bed. That was when the knocking started. It was soft at first. 1 knock. Then another. I stared at the ceiling, convincing myself it was a branch or the wind. When it came again, harder, my wife whispered my name. By the 3rd knock, there was no mistaking it. Someone was at the door. There was no cell service. No neighbors. I told her to stay in bed and move quietly, my bare feet barely touching the floor. The knocking escalated, violent now, rattling the door frame and vibrating through the walls. I crouched beneath the kitchen window and looked out. A large man stood at the door, his back to me, shoulders hunched as he slammed his fist into the wood again and again. He was massive, built thick in an uneven way, like someone assembled incorrectly. A dark jacket hung stiff on his frame. A hat was pulled low, hiding his face completely. I flipped on the porch light. He didn't flinch. He didn't turn. He just kept hitting the door, each impact heavier than the last. That was when my stomach dropped. We hid while the cabin absorbed the blows. When the pounding finally stopped, relief washed over me too fast. Then it started again along the back wall, heavy impacts moving slowly, deliberately, as if he were learning the shape of the building. When it ended, the silence that followed felt heavier than the noise itself. The second night began with my wife whispering that her skin felt wrong. She said it felt loose in some places and tight in others, like it no longer matched the shape underneath. She kept rubbing her arms, scratching hard enough to leave red marks, as if something beneath the surface needed air. I told her it was stress, that fear lingered longer than danger, but my voice sounded thin even to me. At exactly midnight, the knocking returned. Slower this time, patient. Each knock spaced carefully, as if whoever was outside understood our breathing and wanted to control it. We didn't move. We didn't speak. After 10 minutes, the sound stopped, leaving behind a pressure that made my ears ring and my chest feel compressed. Morning brought a piece of paper on the ground near the door. 2 words written in thick, uneven strokes: "Get out." The ink was pressed so hard it tore the fibers. My wife's hands trembled when she picked it up. She said her joints ached, that her teeth hurt in a way she couldn't explain. I noticed dark veins standing out along her neck, pulsing faintly, shifting when she swallowed. We should have left then. Instead, we stayed one more night, clinging to denial like it could protect us. That afternoon, she slept heavily, her breathing shallow and uneven, her body twitching occasionally, as if responding to something I couldn't see. I walked the perimeter of the cabin and found something tangled in the brush near the tree line. Strips of skin, dried stiff and grey, not animal, not cleanly cut. I left them there, telling myself they weren't real, telling myself a lot of things. That night, the sounds didn't come from outside. They came from inside the walls, which shifting noises moved through the wood, slow and intimate, like muscle sliding over bone. My wife woke screaming. Her fingers were swollen, nails thickening and darkening, curving into shapes that looked painful. The veins beneath her skin writhed visibly, rearranging themselves as if searching for better paths. She begged me to help her. She begged me to cut them out, to open her skin and let whatever was inside escape. When I tried to hold her, her body felt wrong, too warm, too dense. Like there was more of her than there should have been. The knocking returned, synchronized perfectly with the movement under her skin. When the front door finally burst inward, the man stood framed in darkness. His hat was gone. His face was a patchwork of stolen flesh, fitted poorly, stretched too tight in some places and sagging in others. He smiled with too many teeth, and stepped aside, gesturing toward the forest like this was something already agreed upon. My wife's bones cracked as she stood. Her shape shifted, joints adjusting, skin tightening into something that fit her better now. She didn't look at me when she walked past. She moved with certainty, like she recognized where she was going. I didn't follow. I left at dawn, alone, and filed a police report that led nowhere. Years later, I avoid quiet places. Some nights, I feel my skin tighten, veins itching to move. I've learned silence isn't peaceful, it's patient. And it remembers who listened long enough to be changed. I never planned to end up back on that stretch of highway, the one that runs like a scar through Nevada's empty middle. Trauma leaves markers, though, and sometimes you follow them without realizing until the road has already swallowed you. My name is Marika Hale. Before the nights collapsed into something else, I worked late along Highway 95 near a nothing town called Boulder Flats. No tourists lingered there. Patrol cars drifted past without stopping. The desert did what it always does. It erased noise, erased people, erased proof. I told myself it was temporary. Survival always sounds reasonable when it's the only option left. It was late October when the night started watching back. Wine scraped sand against motel walls, and the Silver Sage's neon sign flickered like it was struggling to stay alive. That was when I noticed the black SUV, parked across the lot, engine dead. Windows opaque. It stayed there no matter where I stood. I blamed exhaustion. Fear needs an excuse to feel polite. Paranoia doesn't leave footprints. That night, something did. After my shift, I locked myself into room 12, the same peeling wallpaper. The same Bible with pages soft from too many desperate hands. I checked my reflection, hollow. Eyes, smudged eyeliner, hair sticking to my mouth. I reached for a wipe when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Don't look in the mirror. The words drained the heat from my skin. I stared at the glass anyway. Just me, just a cheap rectangle bolted to drywall. The phone vibrated again. Unknown number. She's standing closer than you think. My chest locked. I stepped back, fingers closing around my pepper spray. The air conditioner hummed like it was holding its breath. The peephole showed an empty walkway. When I looked back, the mirror had changed. Not cracked. Not dirty. Occupied. A second face hovered behind mine, breath fogging the glass from the wrong side. Pale skin, wet hair. Eyes black and depthless. I spun. Nothing. The front desk answered with forced cheer. No staff had entered my room. Yes. Someone asked for a spare key. A woman. She said she was my sister. The word echoed wrong. I don't have a sister. Metal clicked behind me. The handle rattled. Testing. Unknown number. Don't call for help. She hates witnesses. 3 knocks followed. Slow. Heavy. Certain. I whispered through the door. A woman stood outside. Hair hanging in soaked ropes. Clothes dripping as if she'd crawled from somewhere that never dries. When she lifted her head, the peephole went black. Blocked by something warm and breathing, cold flooded the room, sharp and invasive. Crawling into my lungs, I locked myself in the bathroom. The mirror there fogged despite the cold. A handprint bloomed on the glass from the inside. Fingers too long, joints wrong. A face pressed forward, stretching the surface like skin. Her mouth never moved, but her voice slid into my ear. Let me in. I fled into the night, lungs burning, feet numb. The SUV's window rolled down. A sheriff leaned out, badge catching moonlight. He looked at my room and sighed like he'd seen it before. Again. He said. Darkness swallowed the motel. Screaming came from room 12. Layered with something wet tearing free. My phone buzzed one last time. Unknown number. Look at his hands. They were smeared with wet sand. The sheriff stepped toward the darkened doorway, gun drawn, shoulders tight with something that wasn't duty. My phone vibrated so hard it numbed my palm. Unknown number. He didn't drown her. He filled her. I stared at his hands again. Sand clung beneath his nails, packed into the creases of his skin like it belonged there. He noticed me watching and smiled, slow and apologetic. As if confession might pass for kindness. He told me her name was Leah. Told me she screamed, too much. Told me the desert listens if you teach it how. When he lunged, instinct took over. I ran. Gravel tore my soles. Air shredded my chest. I ducked behind abandoned gas pumps, pressing myself thin against rust and old oil. He followed. Muttering like prayer and threat were the same language. His shadow stretched wrong across the pavement, joints bending where they shouldn't. Something shattered behind us. Glass, mirrors, the sound rippled through the night, multiplied, echoing from every reflective surface. The sheriff froze. His face drained of color as a shape dragged itself from the motel's glow. Wet, heavy, wearing my clothes. It had my face, but the skin hung looser, as if it hadn't learned how to stay attached. Its eyes were black pits, leaking grains of sand that pattered onto the asphalt. When it smiled, its jaw unhinged afar, tendons stretching like overused rubber. "You buried the wrong girl," it said in my voice. The sheriff fired. Bullets punched through her, tearing holes that immediately filled with flowing sand. She stepped closer, laid a pale hand on his chest. His scream cut off as his mouth filled, cheeks bulging, eyes popping while sand poured out of him in choking waves. His skin dried and cracked in seconds, collapsing inward until he fell, empty and still. The thing turned to me. As it approached, my reflection peeled away from my body, lagging, stretching, trying to follow her back. She touched my cheek. Her fingers sank into deep, pressing against bone. "Thank you for seeing me," she whispered. She dissolved into grit and moonlight, blowing apart on the wind. Sirens came later, real officers. They found what was left of the sheriff, found bones where the desert pointed them. They never found the mirrors that bled sand or the second set of footprints that stopped beside mine. I left Boulder Flats before dawn, but mirrors still hesitate when I pass. Sometimes my skin feels heavier, like something inside me wants out. My phone still buzzes late at night. Unknown number. Remember me. My reflection smiles a second too late.